October 17th, 2000. A routine journey from London to Leeds. Passengers settle into their seats, unaware that disaster is just minutes away. At 115 miles per hour, the train suddenly jolts, a deafening screech of metal. Carriages twist and tear apart. A violent derailment. 4 lives lost, dozens injured. But this was not just an accident. A failure so massive it collapsed an entire company and exposed a deadly secret hiding beneath the tracks. What really happened that day? And why was this disaster completely preventable? This is the story of the 2000 Hatfield rail crash. Hatfield, a town in southern England, is home to over 41,000 people. It sits in Hertfordshire County, 12 miles southeast of Luton and 17 miles north of London. A quiet place with a rich history, it would soon become the center of a devastating railway disaster that changed the future of Britain's rail network. Hatfield has a train station on the East Coast Main Line, one of the busiest railway routes in the UK. This railway line, which started operating in 1850, runs for 393 miles from London to Edinburgh. Along with the West Coast Main Line, it is an important route connecting the north and south, with high-speed trains reaching up to 125 miles per hour. The train involved in the Hatfield disaster was one D38, a midday express service from London King's Cross to Leeds. Operated by Great Northeastern Railway, it used an InterCity 225 IC 225 train set leased from HSBC. Each set consisted of a Class 91 locomotive, 9 Mark IV passenger coaches, and a driving van trailer, DVT. The British Rail Class 91 is a high-speed electric locomotive designed specifically for the InterCity 225 project. Its streamlined rear end blends with the Mark IV passenger coaches, while the blunt end features a driver's cab, allowing it to operate in reverse when needed. To ensure smoother high-speed travel, the Class 91 was built with bogie-mounted gearboxes and underslung transformers, keeping the center of gravity low. This reduced track wear and improved stability, especially on curves. At the time of the accident, Train 1 D38 was running at less than half capacity, carrying just 170 passengers and 12 crew members, not including the locomotive crew. What started as a routine midday journey from London to Leeds would soon turn into one of Britain's most shocking railway disasters. On October 17, 2000, at 12:10 p.m., Train 1 D38 departs London King's Cross Station, bound for Leeds. At the controls sits a trainee driver, gaining hands-on experience under the watchful eye of a senior driver, who remains legally in charge of the locomotive. As the train moves through North London, a routine brake test is carried out. Everything appears normal. With the test complete, 1 D38 accelerates, reaching high speeds as it glides into the English countryside. Just 13 minutes after departure, Train 1 D38 races toward Hatfield Station at 115 miles per hour. As it enters a long right-hand curve, disaster strikes. Suddenly, without any warning, the left rail under the first train car's wheels suddenly shatters, almost like glass breaking. A hidden weakness in the track gives way under the immense force. The second car barely manages to cross the growing gap, but the third car jumps off the tracks right away, breaking away from the train's path. Moving at full speed, the derailed train car crashes into signal K563, knocking it down. The force separates the signal from the locomotive and the first 2 cars. Meanwhile, cars 4 to 6 get pulled across the nearby track. Within seconds, the train speeds toward a ditch, completely out of control. Car 7, the service car, is the next to come off the tracks. With the rails broken ahead, it is pushed into the growing gap. The remaining tracks can't hold it, and its wheels sink into the loose gravel. The car flips over violently, its wheel assemblies torn away, leaving it sliding out of control. The car skids for 240 feet, spinning sideways as its metal body scrapes against the ground. Then, a violent crash. It slams roof first into a support post for the overhead wires at high speed. The impact rips the post from the ground, but the destruction doesn't stop there. The post gets dragged along, cutting through the train car like paper. Before the wreckage comes to a stop, another post to the north is ripped from the ground, making the destruction even worse. Pieces of debris fly in all directions as the service car finally stops, completely twisted and broken apart. As the service car overturns, the rear three vehicles, cars 8 and 9, along with the driving van trailer, DVT, are separated from the rest of the train. They have no choice but to follow the path of destruction, entering the gap in the rails. Car 8 partially falls over before coming to a halt, detached from the train behind it. It rests at a 70-degree angle to the left, hanging into the ditch. Car 9 remains upright but is deeply embedded in the gravel ballast, coming to a stop while the DVT follows, also halted by the wreckage. In just 17 seconds, the chaos unfolds. The train, once traveling at high speed, is now silent. 4 people lie dead, all inside the wreckage of the service car. Another 70 passengers are injured, many severely, but they survive the ordeal. The devastation is unimaginable. The locomotive crew is completely blindsided. They have no idea what's happening as the train suddenly triggers an emergency stop on its own. Despite the derailing train ahead, the locomotive continues to travel 910 meters, about 1,000 yards, with the full brakes applied, until it finally comes to a stop beyond the curve. Meanwhile, the derailing train has caused severe damage to the overhead wires and trackside wiring for communications and signaling, throwing the system into chaos. Errors and warnings flood the local signal box, complicating efforts to assess the situation. Meanwhile, emergency calls from the train driver and head conductor reach emergency services, urgently notifying them of the catastrophic derailment. The first responders arrive within 10 minutes of the crash, but they are met by survivors evacuating the train on their own. The responders must tread carefully, as torn overhead wires still pose a danger. Confirmation that the power was switched off won't arrive until 12:45 p.m., making it crucial to avoid any contact with the dangerous wires. Despite the severity of the derailment, most of the train's structure remained intact, something the Mark IV passenger cars would later be praised for. However, the service car stood as a drastic exception to this. Although the car hadn't experienced extreme flexing or compression, the damage was devastating. The 2 steel posts from the overhead wires, torn from their concrete footers, had sliced through the car from floor to ceiling. The car was left without more than half of its roof, making it look as if something had taken a bite out of it. Inside, the destruction was overwhelming. Seats, tables, pieces of walls, and roof panels were scattered across the wreckage, stretching from the first support post to the final resting position of the car. The scene was chaotic, with debris strewn across the ground, a haunting reminder of the crash's violence. When investigators arrived at the scene, the cause was immediately apparent. Several feet of rail had simply vanished. The investigation into the locomotive and a thorough review of the train crew's actions revealed no technical defects with the train or errors made by the crew. As expected, the trainee driver had been operating the train exactly as they should have, guiding it on what should have been an uneventful journey. But when the track suddenly disappeared beneath the train, disaster struck. The fracture of the outside rail created tension forces, displacing the left rail at the far end of the gap, causing further instability. Even if, by some miracle, the train had managed to stay on course, it would have been impossible for the wheels to stay on the rails. The train could never have slotted back onto the track and continued its journey. The track's destruction was total, and the train was doomed from the moment it hit the gap. The investigators uncovered severe cracking along several hundred meters of the left-hand rail near the gaps, as well as on the remaining right-hand rail. This cracking was traced back to rolling fatigue, a type of wear that occurs when the rail bends and straightens slightly each time a train wheel runs over it. Over time, these tiny movements cause microscopic cracks to form, gradually spreading through the metal. To understand this, think of a paperclip. If you bend it back and forth repeatedly, it will eventually snap. This happens because, just like the rail, microscopic cracks start to spread through the metal until they weaken the structure to the point where it can no longer withstand the forces, causing it to break. This is the process of fatigue cracking, and it's what ultimately caused the devastating failure of the rail during the crash. The search effort was painstaking, as investigators combed through the wreckage and uncovered 300 pieces of metal that once made up the initial 35-meter gap in the rail, also known as the main gap. These fragments, scattered throughout the wreckage, averaged about 11.66 centimeters in size, though it's possible that even more fragments went unnoticed. Further along the wreckage, investigators found another fragmented section of 54 meters of rail. By the time they reached this point, it was clear. The train was already beyond saving. The damage to the track was complete, and the train's fate had been sealed. The investigators took all the pieces of rail they had traced back to the main gap and sent them to an off-site facility. There, they faced what must have been the world's most frustrating puzzle: reconstructing the rail from the scattered fragments they had recovered. As they pieced it together, they uncovered even more severe cracking throughout the reconstructed sections, which pointed to long-term neglect and lack of proper maintenance. The damage wasn't just from typical cracking, but also included spalling, a type of damage where cracks form parallel to the surface, causing chunks of material to break off instead of running through it. Some of the spall found at Hatfield measured as long as 10 centimeters, with a thickness of 5 millimeters. This type of damage revealed just how seriously the rail had deteriorated over time, contributing directly to the disastrous failure. The damage to the rail at the site was so severe and widespread that it was impossible to pinpoint the exact starting point of the fracture. Different pieces of rail debris showed impact marks, indicating they had been struck by train wheels running over the ballast after the rail had already shattered beneath them. Further investigation revealed severe cracking extending as far as 1 kilometer, 0.6 miles, south of the site on various sections of rail. This extended damage pointed to a lack of proper maintenance as the primary cause, rather than any defect in the manufacturing process of the rail, which was only 5 years old. The findings made it clear that the cause of the catastrophic failure was not a flaw in the rail itself, but the failure to properly maintain it over time. After the derailment, ultrasound testing was carried out on both the detached fragments and the intact rails surrounding the site. These tests followed the U3 standard, which was the standard method for conducting such checks at the time, as well as the improved U14 standards in select areas. The investigators paid specific attention to the upper section of the rail, known as the rail head, particularly the outer sections, or gauge corners. This was because, during the curves, the centrifugal forces would push the flange of the train's wheel against the side of the rail. As the train navigated the curve, the pressure shifted from acting directly downward onto the rail to pushing from the side, stressing the gauge corner. This was the area most vulnerable to wear and cracking under such pressure. The investigation revealed that neither the U3 nor the U14 methods were able to reliably produce accurate readings of the entire rail. In particular, the U14 method, which was designed to detect gauge corner cracking, GCC, struggled to identify cracks if they were oriented even slightly outside the narrow range of angles specified for the testing device. Moreover, the testing required the probe to sit flush on top of the rail being examined. If the rail showed surface cracking or even spalling, the probe couldn't establish a satisfactory contact patch, leading to either invalid results with U3 or the spot being deemed untestable with U14. As a result, no data could be recorded for the condition of the rail beyond what was visible to the naked eye, leaving a blind spot where the true state of the rail beneath the surface remained unknown. This issue of hidden damage was made worse by a flaw in the procedure's paper trail. While there were requirements to record the settings of the ultrasonic devices and any discovered damages, there were no specific guidelines on how the data should be recorded. As a result, the same crack could end up being logged in multiple different ways, leading to confusion and inconsistent records. Additionally, there was no standard procedure for how to report the inspection results to higher-ups. Importantly, if ultrasonic testing failed to produce any results, those blind spots, where the damage could not be detected, were not required to be logged, making it nearly impossible to schedule a localized retesting. Inspectors were left to simply hope that the equipment would work better the next time. Only found damage was officially recorded, and anything not found, like a blind spot, wasn't seen as damage at all. It was treated as if it didn't exist. Railtrack, the company responsible for England's rail infrastructure at the time, had already identified issues with the ultrasonic testing methods. In December 1999, they sent out a letter calling for reforms and expansion of the maintenance guidelines, as they found that the current procedures were insufficient in detecting fatigue cracking. The track at the Hatfield accident site was maintained by Balfour Beatty Rail Maintenance Ltd BBRML, a company subcontracted by Railtrack. Investigating the maintenance records from BBRML helped the investigators understand why the rail failed so suddenly during the 1D38 train's journey. The mistakes in the maintenance of the area surrounding the site included a January 1999 U3 test, which failed to detect the rail foot damage, loss of rail bottom, or LORB, didn't trigger a follow-up U14 test to get complete results. Although the note "curve needs re-railing" was attached, no further action was taken, and it wasn't properly recorded. An April 2000 U3 test was abandoned, with the note "total LORB from heavy GCC," meaning the rail was labeled untestable. Interestingly, the same section was listed both as LORB and untestable. This double entry wasn't flagged by superiors. Severe gauge corner cracking was found in another location in October 2000, just 10 days after the Hatfield accident, and the rail was promptly re-railed within a week. However, the Hatfield site, with similar or even worse damage, didn't receive the same urgency. The reason for this discrepancy remains unclear. In summary, the investigation into the Hatfield train derailment revealed several critical findings about the maintenance and testing of the rail. The U3 tests, which were conducted at the required frequencies, failed to detect the full extent of the damage. While these tests were carried out regularly, the U14 tests, which were designed to provide a more thorough analysis of the rail, were not conducted when needed. The lack of these additional tests left significant cracks undetected, contributing to the eventual failure of the rail. By January 1999, the rail beneath the 1D38 train was already in a deteriorated state, which should have prompted immediate corrective action. The inability to perform a complete and proper test on the rail by that point escalated the problem, and by December 1999, it was clear that urgent retracking was required. However, this critical need was ignored, and the rail was not replaced. In fact, the rail should have been replaced by April 2000, well before the derailment occurred. Further compounding the issue was the delay in grinding and resurfacing the rail, which was initially scheduled for 1998, but did not occur until October 5, 2000. Despite the grinding, which was intended to maintain the rail's integrity, the cracks within the rail remained unchanged. The rail was not replaced, and no low-speed zones were implemented to reduce the risk of an accident. This lack of proactive maintenance and failure to recognize the severity of the damage ultimately led to the catastrophic derailment. The damage to the rail was so severe that ultrasonic testing was unable to detect the full extent of the cracks. In some sections, the tests were completely unreadable. This should have been a clear signal for immediate action, but no emergency measures were taken. The lack of urgent response to the extensive damage that was clearly present was a significant factor in the derailment, highlighting serious flaws in the rail maintenance procedures. The investigation revealed a series of critical failures in BBRML's maintenance operations. Engineers were not properly trained to identify and manage track defects, leading to missed signs of severe damage. Employees at all levels failed to follow protocols and maintain safety standards, allowing the track's condition to deteriorate. BBRML also failed to keep two damaged databases in sync, causing discrepancies in the assessment of track conditions. Blind spots in the data, coupled with contradictory inspection results, meant that many issues were either overlooked or misjudged. The risk of track failure was seriously underestimated, and urgent repairs were ignored. The investigation showed that poor management, lack of training, and a failure to properly track and assess damage contributed to the derailment. To put it bluntly, Railtrack contracted BBRML, a company unqualified for the task. BBRML's manager for the section where the accident occurred admitted he had no knowledge of railway engineering or safety, despite it being a requirement for the job. The investigation pointed to cost cutting as the likely reason for the drop in maintenance quality. By hiring lower-skilled workers, BBRML was able to provide an attractive, low-cost offer to Railtrack, who, as a privatized company, was keen to minimize expenses. This cost-saving approach came at a severe cost. With insufficient oversight, poorly trained employees, and neglected maintenance, track conditions deteriorated to dangerous levels. Following the Hatfield derailment, over 1,800 emergency speed restrictions were issued to catch up on repairs, severely disrupting rail services. This led to the cancellation of up to 400 trains per week, causing an estimated economic loss of £6 million per day, totaling hundreds of millions of pounds in lost productivity. In the wake of the scandal, Railtrack's reputation was irreparably damaged, and the company folded in 2002. Its operations were taken over by Network Rail, a government-controlled, non-profit entity. The investigation revealed that Railtrack had hired BBRML, a company that performed substandard maintenance work, failing to properly address defects and allowing the rails to deteriorate to a dangerous point. As a result, charges of manslaughter and breaches of health and safety standards were filed against Network Rail, BBRML, and several managing employees from both companies. The trial, which began in January 2005, saw Network Rail and BBRML found guilty of breaching health and safety standards. However, the manslaughter charges were dismissed. Network Rail was fined £3.5 million, while BBRML faced a hefty £10 million fine. The financial penalties highlighted the severe consequences of the failure in maintenance and oversight that led to the tragic derailment. As we look back on the events of the Hatfield derailment, it's clear that a combination of cost-cutting, negligence, and systemic failures led to a tragedy that claimed lives and forever altered the course of British railway history. The aftermath raised serious questions about the balance between privatization and public safety, and the consequences of cutting corners in the name of profit. What do you think? How much responsibility do companies and governments have to ensure our safety in the face of cost-saving measures? Should accountability go further when public safety is compromised? Share your thoughts and start the discussion in the comments below.